Sally Barnes, Head of the National Capital Authority, is with me for the latest in our series of Canberra conversations about the forces that are shaping the city for the next decade or so. Fittingly enough, we're in the beautiful gardens of Old Parliament House, Senate side, full of kids playing. Great to see them back on the lawns again. Sally, welcome.
Thank you very much. And as you say, fantastic to be here with the children that have come from across the state or across the country, but to also have those roses in the background. You know, they've been there planted by wives of...
Branowski's idea.
Correct.
It was Branowski's idea.
Correct.
And it is a spectacular setting for government to be taking place. Sally, I just wanted to, before we start talking about the future, I wanted to begin with what the National Capital Authority actually is and what it does, because I think there can be a fair bit of confusion about your actual role, and yet it's so significant in the future of the city. So in a nutshell, what is it?
Well, if you were sitting here about 70 years ago, you'd be talking to the person, it wouldn't be a woman, it'd be a man, but you would be talking to the person who was in charge of all of Canberra and putting in place bus shelters, schools, roads, planting the trees, doing everything. And then if you were sitting here post 1988, you'd be sitting with a man again, but that man would not be in charge of everything, because in the early 80s, the Hawke government asked the people of Canberra would they like to have self-government. And initially, believe it or not, the people of Canberra said, no, we really want the Commonwealth to keep running the ACT.
Twice, actually, didn't we?
Twice
we rejected it.
Yeah. And so I've often thought Bob Hawke would be going, really? Anyway, and so then, but he said, oh, well, no, you're going to get it. It's a good thing. Northern Territory's got it. You're going to get self-government. But then the government of the day said, okay, well, we need to have a capital that's a national capital that does the functions of a capital. So is a place where dignitaries can visit, you can have embassies. If you need national institutions, you can work out where you're going to put them. Can we really not trust a local government, but how do we make sure that happens? So they decided they'd keep an organisation that would look after their interests as the national capital, not just as a terrific city. So that's why it's really important for the National Capital to work very closely with the ACT government, because you can have a fabulous central area capital with great institutions and terrific trees and all plantings, but if you don't have a vibrant city where people live and have great places to eat and send their children to school and recreate, then you don't have the full picture.
So therein, I think, though, lies some of the confusion, because in recent times the NCA has had a great deal to say about some major projects in the city. And I guess on the part of ordinary Canberrans there is that confusion. Well, what's the NCA doing determining how we get rail to the south side, making binding decisions on whether the War Memorial can or cannot proceed with a $500 million extension? And I guess there's a real tension between a couple of different vested interests, that of the rest of the nation and what sort of national capital they would like us to have, and on the other hand, ordinary Canberrans who live here, work here, are passing through every day. And that confusion over, well, what's the NCA got to do with all of this?
So I think there is a confusion maybe, but a slight tension. We live here, it's our place. But in fact, when people come to live in Canberra, they're not living in an ordinary city. They're living in the national capital, where the Commonwealth's interests are paramount. The national capital interest is paramount. And on the War Memorial, that's on national land. So anything that's on national land, it's the National Capital Authority that actually is the planning authority. And we're also the planning authority for things like the approach routes and the hills and buffers and ridges, which are those sort of quintessential things that keep Canberra City, Canberra City. When it comes to light rail, we're the planning authority around that part of town, but also light rail's coming on to Commonwealth Avenue. We own that. So if you were living in a house and your neighbour said, oh, by the way, Genevieve, I've decided I'm going to build a new garage in your house, and you go, well, that's very nice, but, you know, please talk to me and let's work it out together. And it's in both of our interests that we have agreement on what you might need on my land. And I'm happy for you to put a garage on my land for your car, but I'd just like a say in it. So that's why. But also Commonwealth Avenue has to keep working because it's a main ceremonial area. You need the cars and processions, and the plan says that needs to be really special place.
And I guess that throws into question one of the other things that's perhaps a point of tension, and that is the working relationship with the ACT government. Yeah. So how does that work out? What's the shape of it now, and where are some of those tension points?
No, we work very well together because I think we all want the best for Canberra. I think that we can see different roles. I think we're quite clear about who does what. And we just need to keep working together. And Canberra wouldn't be Canberra if the ACT government didn't do the citizen part of Canberra and didn't do the transport. But if that transport's coming onto national land, then we need to work with them.
These are huge things to grapple with, though. If we look at the scale of assessing the War Memorial project, for example, if we look at stages 2A, not to mention 2B of light rail, how that project is going to be worked out in its finality, the resources and the capacity you've got to do to really thoroughly examine that planning and to make timely decisions. Are you well resourced enough? Have you got the scope that you need to be able to do those things at the pace at which the city is expanding?
We do, and one of the reasons why it works is that, and this is where I'm going to sound like a bureaucrat, so if you get the planning right to start with, the National Capital Plan sets things out, then you've already got that settled, and that's your basis of which you're going to work. Then, if you have regular liaison with the people doing the work, so with the light rail stage 2A, my team would meet with the ACT government major projects team once a week or twice a week or whatever. That project's come to the board a number of times so the board can see it. So by the time you get to the approval stage, generally, or the public consultation stage, generally there's no surprises. You've worked it through together. Then when it goes out for public consultation, you have a look at that and see what might need changing. But it's not that it lands cold. And I know that some people have said, maybe, not spend as much time on the sort of discussing with the proponent, and they're big, they can do it themselves. But we find that liaison early is where we get the best results. And really, if I had $1 for every time someone said to me, thank God for the NCA, we started this project thinking it would be good if it looked like this. And then your guys worked with us and we workshopped it and we got out the yellow tracing paper and we worked together on it. And we think it's a much better outcome than when we started. And that's the way we like to work.
So look, let's turn to this vision for the future, because as you've articulated, none of Canberra's future happens without the NCA being an intrinsic part of that.
Correct.
So in terms of how that plays out, we've got a number of real pressure points at the moment. We're experiencing a lot of population growth. There are questions over how the city looks in the future. Much of the area that you're responsible for includes some beautiful green spaces, huge open areas, but in a city where there's ever more pressure on our resources. What's the NCA's vision of how the next 10 years iterates out?
Well, so this city is not finished. It's not even halfway finished in terms of the vision of the Griffins, nor in the National Capital Plan. So what we're seeing are planning decisions that were made often 10, 15 years ago, where nothing has happened much, but now you're starting to see buildings come out of the ground, particularly around Constitution Avenue, Northbourne Avenue, City Hill, and it is a bit, where did they come from? How did that just get decided?
It's quite shocking, actually, because they're fun. I mean, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but that it is fundamentally, it's changing the nature of what we're very used to in places like Constitution Avenue, which have been sort of, pretty quiet, dusty even towards the far end. And suddenly there's a lot happening.
So the provisions in the plan that were the enabling planning decisions were made in 2005, 2006. And they'd been through community consultation. They went up the hill to Parliament. Parliamentarians saw all of those and agreed with all of those, because that's their job, to make sure that the National Capital Plan reflects all Australians. But the time wasn't right for those developments yet, for whatever reason, population, finance, whatever. And now, as you say, Canberra's the place to be. And so there's a real market. This is where the market and the commerciality comes in. There's a real market now for what's already been in the plan for 10, 15 years to start coming out of the ground. But when it does, it is sort of like, we didn't know that was going to happen. And it's hard to track back and say, well, actually, you sort of did, but then there's a whole lot of new people that don't even know that, in fact, in the beginning, the NCA ran everything, and that story about independence and self-government. So it's evolving, and our job is to make sure that those developments are high quality, that people have good living spaces, that they've still got access to green spaces, and that we can have a diverse... Well, and also the Griffins, I think what sort of gets lost a little, not lost, but... And it's not even attention, but it's I didn't realise that. So the Griffins always envisaged a very busy commercial centre. So it wasn't like a big country town. Canberra was going to be a city, and it was going to have a commercial centre, and it was going to be quite compact in areas, and then there could be suburban houses as well. So there was always this notion of a city. And that hadn't quite happened until quite recently, where you start to see a skyline that looks more like a city than a town.
And that really touches on where all the conflict can come about, because there are people who are very used to this looking very much like a country town. We see a lot of development around the lake, for example. Yes. I mean, would you envisage that there would be another Kingston foreshore in the future?
Well, the plan's already set. So that 2005-2006 amendments set the city to lake proposal, which is West Basin.
Which has been dormant for a long time, and now the action is starting to ramp up.
You can start to see it. So the provisions of the plan say that area is most suitable, if not very good, for residential, hotel, kiosks, education, institutions hugging that West Basin. And we're so used to seeing car parks and car parks and car parks. You just can't imagine anyone would live there, but once we just start to do you see the extension of the park and the walkway, it will start to come out as well. The City Renewal, because that's ACT government land, and the City Renewal Authority is doing that. So it will be the walk from National Museum of Australia around to Commonwealth Park in the next 10 to 15 years will be transformed.
Oh, that's a really interesting project to conjure with.
It is.
Yeah, and as you say, I'm not sure that people necessarily realise the extent of that. And I did just want to reflect on that, on the level of communications that the NCA does. There was a perception in the past, I think, that the NCA did not necessarily communicate its remit, its goals and its role all that effectively. Is that something you're looking to work with?
Well, in the communication business, the saying is, when you're sick of saying it, people are only just starting hearing it. So we have to work on that all the time. We use a variety of mechanisms, and we've really upped our efforts, particularly in social media, getting to different groups, trying to explain what we do, what's here, how we do it. Community engagement's really important to us, and we're going to be, interestingly, we went out to a range of people through social media and said, how would you like to be engaged, and how would you like to give us feedback? Only 11% said they'd like to put in a formal submission. So we've been working on the formal submission, and people are saying we're interested, but we don't want to write a formal submission. So now we're thinking, how do we gather up what people are thinking and talk to people, but using modern technologies.
Okay, so we're looking for considerable change under the NCA's remit for planning that's possibly already in place, whether people realise that or not, to deliver something that is in fact part of the Griffin's vision.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a really something to conjure with for how we'll look in 2030.
Yeah. So next year Canberra's 110 years old. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like in 120 and 130, because the city, I think, will look very different. And I remember even before I lived in Canberra, I came to a conference here, and the Chief Minister, same Chief Minister, said Canberra's always been known as a bunch of suburbs looking for a city. So the next phase will become a city.
Two very quick questions before I end. When will we see some movement on the Curtin diplomatic precinct?
So we're still doing some investigations there and some planning work, so in the next couple of years.
And finally, what could the NCA do to promote the national capital more to the rest of the country?
Genevieve, where do we start?
Not a quick question at all.
Not a quick question. So it's not just the NCA. So I think I think the greatest storytellers are the cultural institutions and the blockbuster events they have to get people here. So we can help tell that story. And we can be, we can use social media, and we can also engage the politicians. So the people who are the elected officials who come to Canberra have a really big role in telling the story of Canberra, because they're part of that story. So I'd really love it for them to be our advocates and our spokespeople as well.
Oh, to be champions for Canberra.
Yeah.
Not all this business about the bubble, but to actually be champions of Canberra.
You could call it Canberra, or you could call it Tiddlywinks, champions for what happens here. So, and it's a place called Canberra, and it was designed to be a place where Australians work through their aspirations and their differences. And I mean, the history is just full. Federation is fantastic, and the stories of the first Australians who are here, how that fits there, is amazing. And if the people who are doing the work now can't tell it, who can?
Sally Barnes, wonderful to talk to you about what in fact sounds like an action-packed decade or so ahead of us in terms of the National Capital Authority and its role. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
I'm Genevieve Jacobs, and this is Region Media.